Journal from the time of my leaving Scotland, 15 November 1762. The ancient philosopher certainly gave a wise counsel when he said, "Know thyself." For surely this knowledge is of all the most important. A man cannot know himself better than by attending to the feelings of his heart and to his external actions, from which he may with tolerable certainty judge what manner of man he is. I have therefore determined to keep a daily journal, which will be not only useful but very agreeable. I shall here put down my thoughts on different subjects at different times, the whims that may seize me, and the sallies of my luxuriant imagination. I shall here mark the anecdotes and stories that I hear, and the instructive or amusing conversations that I am present at, and the various adventures that I may have.
Very few institutions can offer scholarly collections of books, pictures, artifacts, comparable to those at Yale University. The quality of these collections has attracted scholars and researchers to Yale for more than 2 centuries. Yale is particularly well known for its material on 17th and 18th century English literature and art. Among the most notable are the papers of James Boswell, the 18th century biographer of Samuel Johnson. This collection and others have established Yale University as the most important center for the study of British civilization outside England. A well-organized and determined effort brought this extensive historical and literary collection to New Haven in the summer of 1949. Boswell's scattered archives had been hunted down and collected by a Yale alumnus, Ralph Hayward Isham. After 25 years of persistently gathering Boswell's papers, Mr. Isham sold his extraordinary collection to the Yale Library. The acquisition was made possible by a grant from the Old Dominion Foundation, established by Paul Mellon, and through an arrangement with McGraw-Hill Book Company for exclusive rights to publish the material. Since 1950, the Yale Boswell editions and McGraw-Hill have published 14 volumes. The Boswell Factory, as it is widely known, is housed in Sterling Memorial Library, where Frederick A. Pottle, Sterling Professor of English, Emeritus, and editorial chairman of the project from its inception, directed the editorial work. He continues his work daily as the general editor of the journals. Marion Pottle has cataloged the papers since their delivery to Yale. She has prepared a comprehensive index to be published in 3 volumes in 1980. Irma Lustig edited 2 volumes in the series and is managing editor of the Boswell editions. Frank Brady, a distinguished Boswell scholar, completed his dissertation under Mr. Pottle's direction and was recently appointed editorial chairman. The Pottles began their association with James Boswell in 1923, when Mr. Pottle was studying for his doctorate at Yale under Professor Chauncey Tinker.
It began with the purchase of Boswell's papers from Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Hayward Isham. It had been a very exciting story because it turned out that the Boswell papers were variously divided. In 1927, he bought from Boswell's great-great-grandson what was supposed to be the entire deposit of Boswell's papers. Then it was found afterwards that at least a good third was hidden in a box off in a stable loft on the estate of Boswell's great-great-grandson, and that another third had been carried off by Boswell's executor and turned up in a house in a totally different part of Scotland. Isham, after he bought the papers, in the lot of papers he got in 1927, moved them to his home on Long Island and started the publication of a tremendous set of books, 18 huge volumes of principally Boswell's journals. And he engaged a very well-known English man of letters, Geoffrey Scott, to come and edit them for him. Scott worked from 27 to 29, did a very brilliant job, brought out 6 volumes, and died suddenly of pneumonia. Isham was left at that juncture with his publication half done just about the time that I published the literary career of James Boswell, and I was invited to take over and finish from Scott. We'd hardly got going on it when Isham announced that he wanted a catalog of all his papers, that they were going to be exhibited at the Grolier Club, and he wanted a printed catalog to distribute. I quit editing long enough to prepare that catalog, and Mrs. Pottle helped me. That was her entrance into the work on Boswell. Then, as soon as Yale acquired the papers in 1949, she immediately started on the work of extending our Isham catalog to include all these new papers. She estimates something like 10,000 separate items, of which the original Isham collection wouldn't have had more than 6, I should think. So there was a huge amount of new work to be done, and she worked steadily at that right up to the present time. I think that the most important thing we've done yet is to get the greater part of Boswell's journal into print. That is a completely new work. When it's complete, it's going to be one of the longest of English journals and one of the most famous, I think.
London Journal, 18 January 1763. At 5 I left them for an hour and went to Sheridan's. Mrs. Sheridan, some weeks ago, had asked me to write a prologue to her new comedy. She said there were very few good poets in this age, and she said that if they had been in good terms with Johnson, she would have asked him. Her applying to me after this no doubt flattered me a good deal. As I had written no verses for some months, the task appeared very formidable. However, I wrote one in which she said had good lines, but was too general. I therefore wrote another, which she said was near the mark, and with a little polishing would do. The thing now pleased me exceedingly. I thought it fine to have my lines spoken by Mr. Garrick and resounding through Drury Lane.
There was one very attractive bit of Boswell's journal, his London journal of 1762, 1763, which had not been in Isham's original purchase. It was extremely well written, and because Boswell had nothing much to do that year except to write its journal, it was much better in terms of literary organization than most of the journal. So we picked that for the first publication. I edited it and published it in 1950, and it was a very successful book. The total sales in all forms must have gone to 1 million copies, if not more, and was translated into 6 foreign languages.
Well, these are fragments of Boswell's journal, London Journal of 1769. They were found over at Malahide Castle in a croquet box. I went to work to see if I could get them put together a good deal like a jigsaw puzzle. And after a while, you could get a little something out of them.
London Journal, 15 December 1762. I then went to the cockpit, which is a circular room in the middle of which the cocks fight. The cocks, nicely cut and dressed and armed with silver heels, are set down and fight with amazing bitterness and resolution. The uproar and noise of betting is prodigious. An old cunning dog, whose face I had seen at Newmarket, sat by me a while. He thought I would be a good subject for him, but he found himself balked. I was sorry for the poor cocks. I looked around to see if any of the spectators pitied them, but I could not observe the smallest relenting sign in any countenance. Thus did I complete my true English day, and came home pretty much fatigued and pretty much confounded at the strange turn of this people.
We plan to publish the journal in 2 editions, one a so-called trade edition and the other a research edition. The research edition is not yet begun. We haven't finished the trade edition. The trade edition is laid out for the general reader. We hope that that is our intention. And as I'm fond of saying, the annotation of that edition is intended to turn in toward it. That is, a note is not supposed to be there unless it somehow illuminates the text and makes it better reading for the ordinary reader who doesn't care about going to the bottom of things. In the research edition, the notes will turn out and lead you from Boswell's journal to all kinds of other areas of the different kinds of histories I mentioned, of political history, social history, literary history, and so forth. Then there will be the long collection of research volumes of Boswell's letters, of which we have now already published 3. The use of those by other scholars is already very considerable.
On the Grand Tour, Motier, 3 December 1764. Sir, I am a Scots gentleman of ancient family. Now you know my rank. I am 24 years old. Now you know my age. 16 months ago I left Great Britain a completely insular being, knowing hardly a word of French. I have been in Holland and in Germany, but not yet in France. You will therefore excuse my handling of the language. I am traveling with a genuine desire to improve myself. I have come here in the hope of seeing you. Your writings, sir, have melted my heart, have elevated my soul, have fired my imagination. Believe me, you will be glad to have seen me. Forgive me, sir, I feel myself moved. I cannot restrain myself. Oh, dear St. Preux, enlightened mentor, eloquent and amiable Rousseau, I have a presentiment that a truly noble friendship will be born today. Open your door then, sir, to a man who dares to tell you that he deserves to enter it. Place your confidence in a stranger who is different. You will not regret it. I await your reply with impatience. Boswell.
Boswell had a very wide acquaintance, and he cultivated famous men. I have noticed in this, the new history of members of Parliament by Marion Brooke, how frequently Boswell's journal is quoted in those biographical articles. If they want something to characterize the person they've been writing about, they're likely to pick out a few sentences from Boswell's journal, which shows Boswell talking with that man and recording the striking attributes of his personality.
On the Grand Tour, Geneva, 24 December 1764. I took a coach to Ferney, the seat of the illustrious Monsieur de Voltaire. I was received by 2 or 3 footmen who showed me into a very elegant room. At last, Monsieur de Voltaire opened the door of his apartment and stepped forth. He received me with dignity and that air of the world which a Frenchman acquires in such perfection. He sat erect upon his chair and simpered when he spoke. He was not in spirits. We talked of Scotland. He said the Glasgow editions were très belles. I said an academy of painting was also established there, but it did not succeed. Our Scotland is no country for that. He replied with a keen archness, "No, to paint well, it is necessary to have warm feet. It is hard to paint when your feet are cold." Another would have given a long dissertation on the coldness of our climate. Monsieur de Voltaire gave the very essence of raillery in half a dozen words.
The Journal Vautour des Hebrides was originally the private journal that Boswell kept on the tour. It wasn't strictly private. He showed it to Johnson. He showed it to other people. When Johnson died in 1784, Boswell immediately began reviewing his materials for the life of Johnson, and decided that the tour to the Hebrides was so much a unit that it would be a great pity to just to sync it with the other things. And he decided to publish that by itself, revise that book, and publish it ahead of the life of Johnson. He did that, and the work was published in 1785 and went through 3 editions.
The Tour of the Hebrides, 19 October 1773. Mr. Johnson said, as we were going up the narrow sound between Mull and Nuns Island, with solemn-like rocks on each side of us, and the waves rising and falling, and our boat proceeding with a dancing motion, "This is roving among the Hebrides, or nothing is." A man has pleasure in applying things to words, and comparing the reality with the picture of fancy. We had long talked of roving among the Hebrides. It was curious to repeat the words previously used. It will be curious, too, to perceive how the impression made by reading this, my journal, some years after our roving, will affect the mind. Mr. Johnson said I should read my journal about every 3 years. Joseph made a very good observation. "Your journey," said he, "will always be more agreeable to you."
Boswell is a biographer who reports the conversation of his subject and reports it dramatically. Johnson, of course, was a very special character for a biography because he was dramatic in his behavior. It is generally conceded, I think, that there has never been any other biography in any language that gives so complete a character of a man, of a great man, as Boswell's Life of Johnson does of Samuel Johnson.
The Life of Dr. Johnson. The year 1747 is distinguished as the epoch when Johnson's arduous and important work, his Dictionary of the English Language, was announced to the world. Dr. Adams found him one day busy at his dictionary when the following dialogue ensued. Adams: "This is a great work, sir. How are you to get all the etymologies?" Johnson: "Why, sir, here is a shelf with Junius, and there is a Welsh gentleman who has published a collection of Welsh proverbs." Adams: "But, sir, how can you do this in 3 years? Johnson: "Sir, I have no doubt that I can do it in 3 years. Adams: "But the French Academy, which consists of 40 members, took 40 years to compile their dictionary." Johnson: "Sir, thus it is. This is the proportion. 40 times 40 is 1600. As 3 to 1600, so is the proportion of an Englishman to a Frenchman."
I found the Boswell papers the most congenial kind of research work that I ran into. I love to make texts. I love to set up a text from a written document. I like to read the manuscript and get it all down on paper. And then I like to annotate it, the historical and literary puzzles that it contains. I'm very well pleased with the 2 series that we planned, the research series and the trade series. I might now, in terms of what it costs, I might think the project was too ambitious. But of course, there are a number of things to be considered in that connection. It has justified itself in the amount of work it's given students. The project can certainly be completed as laid out, but all these projects cost more and more and more When we started it, we could publish a volume for $5. The same book now is nearer 20. The problem is as simple as that. If you don't raise a large sum of money, the thing is endless. It will go on for 150 years. It's a mystery at the end. Nobody can explain it completely. But the thing that is clear to me is that Boswell had never lived through a thing until he'd written it down. He said somewhere, "I should have no more corn growing than I can get in. It is a waste if all be not preserved." He thought the most glorious passages of his life were wasted somehow if, after he had experienced them, he didn't get them written. The whole thing wasn't done until it was written down.
London Journal, 16 July, 1763. He advised me to keep a journal of my life, fair and undisguised. I told him that I had done so ever since I left Scotland. And now, O my journal, art thou not highly dignified? Shalt thou not flourish tenfold? And now, is there any argument which can outweigh the sanction of Mr. Samuel Johnson? He said that I should keep it private, that I might surely have a friend who would burn it in case of my death. I rather encouraged the idea of having it carefully laid up among the archives of Auchinleck. I told Mr. Johnson that I put down all sorts of little incidents in it. "Sir," said he, "there is nothing too little for so little a creature as man. It is by studying little things that we attain the great knowledge of having as little misery and as much happiness as possible."